Hey, I'm Riley Ross. You know Bob Burke, right? If you've grown up in Oklahoma and you're alive with ears listening to this, then there's a good chance you've read his writings and even been directly impacted by the work he's done. Bob's a lawyer, a journalist, an Oklahoma Hall of Fame inductee as a prolific writer. Bob Burke has written more historical nonfiction books than anyone in history, and he started writing at the age of 39. Bob has published over 120 books by now, and they're all related to Oklahoma in some way. He's written about anyone and anything, black, white, native, conservative, liberal, men, women, communities, athletes, doctors, of course, oil men, and everything in between. But there's a particular kind of story he likes to tell.
Every fifth book, I want to write about somebody who is part of Oklahoma history that nobody knows about. In writing the Cape Bernard book, it resulted in a Cape Bernard statue, or not statue, but a sculpture that's outside the Secretary of State's office of where Miss Kate is sitting on a bench, who was the only woman to address the Constitutional Convention and got more votes in the first election than the governor, more than anybody, and she couldn't vote for herself.
Bob's seen a lot, and he's got a lot of big ideas. And despite everything that he's seen in recent years, he's got a vision for Oklahoma's future that will leave you with goosebumps.
I hope that 50 years from now, when a writer is writing about things in Oklahoma, that in our second century, we changed the world as much as we did in the first century.
Oh, and did I mention that his voice is as smooth as backstrap molasses? So what do you know about Bob Burke? Well, friend, you're about to know a whole lot more. This is Y'all Okay? Howdy, friends and neighbors. Welcome to Y'all Okay, a podcast about the state of Oklahoma and the people connected to it. This interview, this was such a joy for me. This wasn't actually the first time Bob and I had met. We met when I was in high school, and I was friends with his stepdaughter, Natalie. In retrospect, I regret not hanging out at their house a little bit more, but I wasn't one of those high school kids that was very concerned with hearing stories of the Boren Broom Brigade or about Larry Derryberry, which we talk about all that stuff in this episode. Not only does Bob have a mind-numbing number of accomplishments, but his ability to actually understand and recall information is pretty incredible. And he can just spin a yarn with the best of them. So before we get started, let's get it out there that this episode is sponsored by Al's Bicycles Northwest at 7930 North MacArthur Boulevard in Oklahoma City, just a block north of Northwest Expressway on MacArthur. I got a crazy idea for you. If you're a hunter and you're interested in riding a bike on your hunt, no joke, Al's Bicycles can hook you up. If it's bow hunting, black powder, rifles, shotguns, these guys can outfit a mountain bike, probably like a fat tire bike, with all the essentials like racks or trailers. You probably couldn't go on an elk hunt, but you could do, I imagine, whitetail and some smaller game. If you're not hunting and maybe you're just farting around the neighborhood or even in your house, they can also set you up. It's getting cold, and they have super quiet trainers that you can even watch the Thunder games or football games while you ride your bike. So give them a call at 405-728-7100, and they'll hook you up. Thanks, Al's. So without any further messing around, please enjoy the Sage of the Southwest, the brain from Broken Bow, friends and neighbors, Mr. Bob Burke. Bob Burke, thank you for being on Y'all Okay?
Thank you.
Yeah, you're coming in great. So you were a former DJ on Coma, isn't that right?
That's right, yeah. When I was in college, I did the Babbling Bob Burke Show.
You're a fan of alliteration, huh?
Yes.
We're gonna get to more bees here in a second. Well, let's just get into it right off the bat. I was talking to Representative Mickey Dolenz. Probably, I don't know, it was a while ago. It was two, by the time this comes out, it will be 2 episodes ago. Okay. And he is at the Capitol in room 510B. And he said that he was, because he's getting his master's at OU in education. Wow. And he had said that he was just talking to President Boren the other day. And President Boren said that he used to be in 510B as well. And that he was actually a legislator for a few years. And then everybody in the Democratic caucus got upset with him and more or less banished him to room 510B, which is why he ran for governor.
Yes, and even scraped his name off the door at one point.
What? And you were his campaign manager for that gubernatorial campaign, isn't that right?
Yes.
That's amazing.
I first met David Boren the day I came up as a hick kid from Broken Bow down in southeast Oklahoma.
Way down there.
I came up to OU as a freshman,
a
17-year-old freshman in 1966.
Wow.
I was assigned to Wooster House, which was an old dorm that had been in a barracks for the Navy during World War II, just south of the football stadium. It was in Wilson Center that has been torn down for many years. But I walk into Wooster House, and the only way I had gotten to Norman was my high school counselor gave me a map and a copy of my high school transcript. And I was able to drive to Norman. I had never been anywhere.
Oh, my gosh.
But it was a fortuitous day for me because I walk into Wooster House and met some guys, and they said, hey, you're supposed to go downstairs and meet our counselor. Mm-hmm. But they said, nobody's doing that. I thought, my dad taught me that if it's a rule, you need to obey it. So I went down, and it was a young, curly-headed law student, 7 years older than me, who had gone to Yale and had gone to Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar, and now was enrolled in the OU Law School. Young David Boren was my counselor. And when I told him I was from Broken Bow, that made us fast friends because his favorite aunt, Mae Boren Axton, who wrote Elvis's first song, Heartbreak Hotel, was my high school English teacher and mentor. And that was his favorite aunt and uncle. John Axton, his uncle, was my football coach, and John and Mae were the father and mother of Hoyt Axton.
Right, yeah.
And which is David's first cousin, the great entertainer, who wrote such great songs as Joy to the World, Jeremiah Was a Bullfrog, and 600 others.
How does that, I don't even understand how that happens in, one genetic line.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was just one of those days in life. And so had I not gone down to meet our counselor and had time with him to say, hey, I'm from Broken Bow, and that we melded, and here we are,
50,
over 50 years. No, 51 years later. It's been a great ride, and much of my success in life has come through my friendship with David Boren. In fact, just recently, when he announced his retirement next year, I got a little misty-eyed.
Sure.
Because I said, Chief, 51 years and 4 months ago, I walked in to see this curly-headed nerd, really smart guy,
let's face
down in the first floor of Wooster House.
Yeah.
And here we are today talking about you 51 years and 4 months later of resigning as president.
I know.
Would you have ever thought you would have even been president,
Yeah.
So, although he had such great years at OU in law school, and developed such a bond with President George Cross that he, at that moment, wanted to someday become president of OU, and so it all came about.
That's amazing. That's quite a ride from one angle to the other.
Oh yeah, and you were talking about on that fifth floor in those rooms up there where legislators are put who really don't have very much power.
Right.
Okay. David didn't have very much power. He served 6 years. In fact, in 1968, we all went over to Seminole County, and helped him, because that was his home, helped him be elected to the legislature. So he ultimately served 6 years without any power. He literally was on the back row, but he had lots of he had lots of ideas that were, frankly, the old guard, the old Democratic leadership at the time, including Governor David Hall. Nobody bought his ideas.
Right. So
in about 1972, he decided he's going to run for governor. And when he first called me with that, I said, "What?" In fact, the first $2,000 survey on name recognition in the state showed that he only had 4%. And perhaps half that was his father, who was the youngest man ever elected to Congress over in eastern Oklahoma, and my dear friend. In fact, my first of 129 books was a biography of Lyle Boren, the old congressman.
How could a man with the name Boren and your dad's a congressman only have 4% name recognition?
Well, because Lyle had been out of Congress for a long time.
Oh, okay.
Because he served from 1936 to 1946.
Oh, and now we're talking 30
by the
years
70s,
later.
Oh, yeah. Most people, maybe over in what used to be the old 4th District, southeast Oklahoma, some of those people would have remembered Lyle. But in 30 years, name recognition goes by the wayside quickly.
Yeah, that's a
so
generation.
there just wasn't. And David, on the back seat of the legislature of the House, didn't have a lot of following.
So to increase name recognition, is that where the Boren Broom Brigade was formed?
Yeah, certainly a lot of that. Now, David spread his wings and did an incredible job. Nobody worked harder for it over a 2-year period than him.
Yeah.
Because he had been a professor at Oklahoma Baptist University.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So a line of students later who became cabinet secretaries and judges and campaign workers and staff members, those people came forward as supporters, and not only Oklahoma Baptist University, but David did go around the state and find older people who had supported his dad, whole groups of people.
Sure.
And then David was a champion of education, even as a back row member of the legislature, and was able to develop great relationships with teachers around the state. And so he started having a great following. Now, in 1974, it was a very difficult. Nobody gave him a chance of winning because the two primary candidates, except him, were the current governor, David Hall, even though he was having legal problems, and a guy named Clem McSpadden, who I later wrote his biography. Clem McSpadden was a powerful Democratic senator from Claremore, or from that area of the state, and he, because he's really from Chelsea, he wouldn't want me to say he's from Claremore.
I don't even know where Chelsea is.
Okay, it's a wonderful town,
somewhere northeast.
But it's near Claremore, and but Clem was revered in the state not only as the Senate Majority Leader, but he was the world's most famous rodeo announcer. I mean, at the National Finals Rodeo, you had this incredible voice, the greatest voice ever for rodeos, and all over the nation. I mean, it was the Calgary Stampede, all the major rodeos in America, Clem was the voice of it.
Wow.
So how could young David Boren beat that? It was difficult early on.
Yeah.
But then the broom was the great symbol. David Hall was under investigation as governor for providing kickbacks for the construction of state projects. And the Daily Oklahoman every other day had a story about that. Really, they had investigative reporters on that. Now, there's a later story of where they would have arrested him even while he was a sitting governor, except for David Boren, who had been elected governor, who simply asked the U.S. attorney to wait until the day after the election.
Yeah.
He did not want it to be a blight upon the state to have a sitting governor carried out of the building.
Yeah.
So that's going far ahead. But in 74, there needed to be something to give him great publicity. Mm-hmm. Two things happened. One, David decided to do walks. For example, the first one was from Altus to Blair.
Yeah.
Second one was from Broken Bow to Idabel.
Really?
And what this is about a 2-day walk.
Yeah.
Of where that he and the press just covered it big time.
Yeah.
Is he would walk and then stay all night in the middle, because it took 2 days to walk those. They were great for us to try to lose weight.
Yeah.
Because he and I have always had that problem. And so not only would he walk, but it had great publicity. So, for example, from Altus to Blair took 2 days, and so the middle night he stayed with some supporter along the way. So it was so neat because with the publicity of it, we would go down, and the walking didn't help us lose any weight at all, because then some little lady would come out with some cookies.
Sure.
But it was just, television would see this little lady walking down. Here comes David Boren,
Yeah.
And so that was great. But the biggest thing that ever happened was the idea at a meeting by his cousin named Jim Boren.
Okay.
Jim Boren had been in Washington for many, many years, had been a government official, had actually had on the old Mutual broadcasting system a daily show, kind of like fellow Oklahoman Paul Harvey, who did the rest of the story.
Yeah.
But Jim did a story called, I can't remember, but it was mimicking the people within the Beltway.
Yeah.
He called them mugwumps,
Okay.
The old politicians.
Yeah.
It's almost like draining the swamp, okay?
Right, yeah.
Similar to that. But he made fun of them, and he had a daily program. So Jim was very smart.
Okay.
So I remember one time when Jim came into a meeting and was carrying a broom. Well, so you're asking this Rhodes Scholar, Yale graduate to go around the state carrying a broom? Yes, we did that.
Wow.
In fact, I even ruined one campaign car with it. We had this gold station wagon, Ford station wagon, from Morgan Ford in Wewoka. Bob Morgan was chief of staff of the governor and became the state's adjutant general. Anyway, he was a Ford dealer in 1974 and gave us this gold station wagon.
Wow.
And so the Ford station wagon in those days had a manual roll-up window.
On the back?
On the back, on the very back. And so I stuck 2 brooms traveling around the state in the corners of that.
Yeah.
So when we finally took it back, that window was totally bowed and had to be replaced.
Oh my gosh.
But anyway, so we traveled around the state. And we bought out in Purcell. There was a broom factory, and we bought out brooms. And what a great deal for a housewife. Because, see, the broom stood for the following. Let's use this young man with great ideas to sweep out the old guard. Mm-hmm. By this time, everybody knew that David Hall was going to be indicted. Everybody thought that.
Yeah,
Certainly,
like it was an inevitability.
Absolutely. It was inevitable that he was going to be indicted. And this old guard leadership, we had gone just in the decade before of the old guard symbolized by Gene Stipe in the Senate and by people like J.D. McCarty in the House. This old guard even fighting court reform, which we needed so badly after 3 justices of the Supreme Court were either impeached or had to be removed from office or resign for taking bribes to vote a certain way. So we had this old guard, and the people of the state knew. In fact, the timing was so right. Had it been a decade before or a decade after, I don't think David Boren would have been elected governor.
Yeah.
Because the people were sick of their government.
Sure.
Both on the nationwide, we had gone through Watergate.
Yeah.
So they were sick of their national government.
We were on the tail end of Vietnam at that point.
Absolutely.
74.
And so they were tired of they were really sick with their federal leadership. And now they were sick of their state leadership because of David Hall's inevitability of being indicted, and of people like J.D. McCarty, who had now, by this time, been indicted for income tax evasion and had left the House and had been beaten, in fact, 6 years before. But this whole aura of this old guard. So all at once, this broom.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what a great symbol. Sweeping out the old guard.
I know.
All at once, a supporter, a housewife supporter in southeast Oklahoma thinks of David Boren when she's sweeping off the porch.
Yeah.
Sweeping out. So our supporters around the state bought up every broom that we could get.
That's amazing.
And it was just a wonderful campaign. We would go to campaign rallies and have 2 or 3 dozen brooms. People, and of course we took along staplers and signs, and we could staple right onto a broom, Boren for governor, a big blue and white Boren for governor.
Man, so that's like some old school populism.
Oh, it is, and that's what it was. It was grassroots because David could not be outworked.
Yeah,
he in this primary in '74 when nobody gave him a chance. David Hall, the sitting governor, runs third. Mm-hmm. In the primary, Clem McSpadden runs first by 80,000 votes.
Wow.
80,000 votes more than David. Okay? And so David's second. And so he absolutely surprises all the politicians of the time, the political pundits, by running second and beating the sitting governor.
And then winning in a
And
runoff.
then he wins it in the runoff and becomes the Democratic nominee. And that was by hard work, by being in every town. I mean, there's not a spot in the road. I remember, and he had this sixth sense about stopping at every town. Mm-hmm. For example, I remember one time it was just he and I and a guy named Sven Holmes, who later became a federal judge, and then later became the dream job. He was general counsel of the Baltimore Orioles.
Oh, wow!
And Sven's a great lawyer in Washington now. But Sven and I were traveling with David, and in the closing days of the campaign. But I remember that I'm driving, and we're about 45 minutes late. Mm-hmm. I'm driving between Wilburton and McAllister.
Okay.
We're going to be 45 minutes late for a luncheon there.
Okay.
And so we're going through the tiny town of Fanshawe, which you may never have. Fanshawe has one store. Okay.
Okay.
And so I'm thinking, now David's sitting in the right front seat, and we've already been up for a few hours, and he's taking a nap.
Sure.
And so I'm driving. I'm thinking, I know he would want to stop at Fanshawe, but I'm not even going to slow down.
No, he's asleep.
I'm going to go through there. He's asleep. I'm telling you, we hit the city limits, and there's like an electronic monitor. He wakes up. I got to stop here. I said, Chief, we're late, and we've been here 2 times, already. You're going to win these people. Nope, I got to stop. He stops at the store and talks, and sure enough, I think we got every vote in Fanshawe.
Wow.
But the same thing would apply if we were in the opposite, in western Oklahoma, in the tiny town of Corn.
I know Corn,
okay. Yeah. Corn, we won Corn big time. I mean, we got every vote in Corn, He got every vote in Corn. But he made us all feel like we. You'll notice once in a time I'll say, we won that, we won that.
Yeah.
He made staff and he made his supporters feel like that, hey, we're just family. We're all in one thing. This is one goal that we're trying to do.
Right.
And so in the general election, we face a very formidable Republican opponent, Jim Inhofe, mm-hmm. who had been the mayor of Tulsa. Mm-hmm. He was in. I think he was mayor of Tulsa after that, but he was very popular in Tulsa and other places. He had been in the state Senate, a very powerful Republican in the state Senate, and so a lot of people said, "Wait a minute, Has Oklahoma become a real 2-party state?" Well, we had, mm-hmm. because Henry Bellman and Dewey Bartlett in the 60s mm-hmm. had both been elected governor. Yeah. And all at once, so we're running against, and then Henry Bellman is a Republican member of the Senate.
Yeah.
So are Oklahomans going to elect Jim Inhofe over young David Boren? Now, David had become incredibly well known by then, mm-hmm. but in the general election, the sweep out the old guard theme doesn't work as much.
Doesn't work with Jim Inhofe
against
back in the 70s.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the general election was very active with a number of debates. Mm-hmm. David had, on every issue, you knew exactly where he stood. And even then, education was a big-time issue. Mm-hmm. And he had great ideas for common schools and for private schools and for higher education, certainly, mm-hmm. because he believed in education very much. If you ever go to David Warren's office, it's interesting to see who his mentors are in life.
Okay.
For example, there may be on the wall a great picture of him and Sam Rayburn, who was Speaker of the House when his father served in Congress. In fact, there's a great picture of him sitting in Sam Rayburn's lap, okay? And there are pictures of world leaders. Prime ministers and mm-hmm. kings, all that. But also on his wall, you will see his third grade teacher.
Oh, yeah.
You will see his high school debate coach.
Yeah.
His high school English teacher. But those pictures on his wall, I think, talk about his life.
Absolutely.
Because he's always looked at educators to be his mentors. Mm-hmm. We will write a book someday about calling mentors, because we all have mentors
sure.
in our life.
Yeah.
And those are very important in education. After he becomes governor, the first time that I knew that he was going to be an absolute champion of education was that he was, as the governor, invited out to the state fairgrounds mm-hmm. to hand the award to the state teacher of the year.
Okay.
Well, that's a big deal,
yeah.
to be a teacher of the year among all the teachers in Oklahoma. And he was shocked to learn that the teacher of the year, the reward was they got a $100 gift certificate to John A. Brown's, which was an old department store. Okay, at Penn Square. John A. Brown was and they had been downtown. It was a big, very successful, well-liked department store.
Yeah.
That's the only thing the teacher of the year got. So he says, what?
Yeah.
And that eventually caused him, because of his love for education, to found, now 31 years ago, the Oklahoma Foundation for Excellence, which has rewarded thousands of students as all state academic scholars, mm-hmm. and thousands of both administrators and teachers mm-hmm. in the state. I'm privileged to be one of the 4 remaining original board members of 31 years ago. But his absolute support for education at all levels mm-hmm. was then capped off by 23 years ago, him becoming the president of OU.
Yeah.
He could have stayed in the U.S. Senate. He was somewhat concerned with the partisanship that had risen, because when he first went to the Senate, there was a Senate softball team.
Right.
And Ted Kennedy might be the catcher, and a Republican senator from Wyoming, who I've forgotten his name right now, might be the pitcher.
Sure.
And so they might go to each other's houses. But by the 16th year, by the time he had left the U.S. Senate, that crossing the aisle friendship was not there. So all at once, his close friendship with a Republican senator was almost out of, they couldn't do it. Their comrades in each party didn't support that bipartisan across the because in years before that, Oklahoma had been served well by, for example, Dewey Bartlett, a very conservative Republican oil man from Oklahoma. His best friend in the Senate was Sam Nunn from Georgia. A Democrat.
Yeah.
And so nobody had problems with that. And so we don't see that. We see that polarization toward one
party.
Get
worse?
It's got terribly worse. And that's why George Washington once said that we should never have political parties, because he's the only president who was not a member of a political party.
Yeah.
He was the father of our country. And he said, I'm afraid that someday, if we have political parties, that public officials will be more concerned about their party than their country.
Yeah.
We're there. And we've been there for 20 years.
Sure.
We really have. You know.
Yeah.
Not only on the federal level, but unfortunately in Oklahoma. We have come that way, you know, of where that just... And so I love it when I find a state representative or state senator who literally reads bills and votes his or her conscience rather than just go the party line, you know. Now, those are few and far between, unfortunately.
Yeah, you don't see a lot of that.
No, you don't. And you have very few people in Washington, you know. You have a dying generation of those, like John McCain. He doesn't care. He's going to vote. In Oklahoma, there's nobody who fought for the right to vote right, you know, as you see it, other than Republican Henry Bellman. I mean, Henry Bellman always did right, even if it cost him votes.
Yeah. I mean, the most recent example I can think of is in the most recent budget discussions and that sort of thing. You know, there's this Representative Leslie Osborne from Mustang. She wrote something in objection to Speaker McCall, or it was I can't really remember the specifics of it, but she was removed from her. Leslie's a friend of mine.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I support her for state labor commissioner, by the way. I'm holding a fundraiser at my house for her.
Oh, really?
Later this month.
Oh, cool.
But Leslie has, I think, shown that ability to call the speaker out on something. She said, wait a minute, we're just telling the public one thing. But that's not the way it is. This was already cooked up because she knew that passing the cigarette tax, for example, was going to be overturned. Yeah, because that was a no-brainer. That was unconstitutional. Yeah. Although, and then so finally, and then on education funding is where she finally got called out. You know.
Yeah, okay, that's what it was.
She called them out.
Yeah.
She called them out, and although the speaker said it had nothing to do with it, she was fired as chairman of the Appropriations Committee the next day.
Yeah, the optics aren't good. So let's talk about. I want to talk about so many things, but let's talk about unconstitutional stuff.
Okay.
Within the past, I would say 8 years. So here's my backstory. Grew up in Oklahoma, graduated from OU, got my MBA at Baylor, lived in Texas for a bit. In 2010, moved back to Oklahoma. And that's kind of when I started noticing that, like, we have a pattern of passing laws either through the legislature or through public referendum that ultimately get overturned as unconstitutional. So whether it's Sharia law, whether it's the cigarette tax, whatever. What's up with that? Are we more than normal pass unconstitutional laws?
Absolutely. 2 reasons, I believe.
Okay.
First of all, and I'll talk more about it, the party line. Sometimes they just, on emotional issues like abortion, the 10 Commandments, things like that, that our legislature tends to just vote this idealistic thing. Somebody said that a legislator in these days has to go to some school somewhere, a Republican legislator, to learn 20 lines. I believe in this because of what, okay? Of this reason. So one reason is that they are voting the party line and do not care about constitutionality. And secondly, I blame term limits.
Yeah.
Let me talk about term limits first.
Okay.
Term limits was passed back during the administration of a Democratic governor, and David Walters. But it frankly was nothing but a referendum against State Senator Gene Stipe. Okay. Stipe had served in the Senate forever. You know, did a lot of things that a lot of people hated.
He won a lot of money for his district, though.
But he took care of his folks.
Yeah,
no question. Took care of his folks. But that was a referendum on Gene Stipe, you know. So, but I think that was a mistake. I don't think we'll ever reverse it. Here's why I think it's a mistake. Right now, no one can serve in the legislature for more than 12 years. Okay. So we have, a Speaker of the House often who's been there 4 years or 6 years. 4 years and 6 years in the legislature, you don't hardly even know where the bathrooms are.
Right.
Okay? And to thrust those people into leadership is unfair to them.
Yeah.
Because they don't know, they have no institutional knowledge.
Right.
And since they don't have, and that hurts unconstitutionality. Here's why. In the old days, when you had on both sides a Charlie Ford, a Republican who had been in the Senate for 25 years, and then other Democrats who had been there for 25, 30 years, if somebody came, a young legislator came with a law, they would say, nope, we're not even going to hear that. It's unconstitutional. Let me tell you why. Okay. So you had strong leadership in those days that would simply prevent unconstitutional bills from ever seeing the light of day.
Yeah. Why waste time?
They knew what was constitutional
and
what was not constitutional. A personal example, I had helped write workers' comp legislation for 35 years, and in trading with the Chamber of Commerce one year, we were talking about subrogation in a workers' comp death case.
Okay.
And Gene Stipe said, Bob, that's unconstitutional. And it turns out 20 years later, we have cases on that, and it is unconstitutional. Yeah. But it was hidden over in the Constitution in a place where the people had voted it in 1950. Yeah. He came to the legislature in 1948, so he knew that. So you had that institutional knowledge.
Yeah.
So there's no leadership at the top who will tell their members. Now, sometimes they do crazy things, but I've seen bills come through the committee that are so unconstitutional, and they've passed many unconstitutional bills. I personally put a sign up in my in the attorney's lounge at the Workers' Comp Court back in 2013 says Bob Burke will handle all appeals to the Supreme Court of the new comp law that gave Oklahoma the lowest benefits in the country, that I will handle them free and without expense. I've filed 102 so far.
Oh, my gosh.
And won the first 43. I'm 43-1.
Oh, that's
in challenges. And so, for example, just in my field, in the workers' compensation law, they passed a bill in 2013 that they knew was unconstitutional. Leaders, they knew that. Leaders in both houses would say, well, we know it's unconstitutional, but it's better for policy.
Well, you were on the governor's, advisory panel or something about that in the beginning?
Well, in the beginning, in 2011, Mary Fallon's first year, I rewrote the entire workers' comp law, and the legislature passed it without question. But then you had a couple of major companies and the State Chamber of Commerce who simply did not want comp to exist as it is, so they were behind this 2013 law that just gutted benefits by about 60% and gave us the lowest benefits in the country. At the time, I put out a paper that said there are 52 unconstitutional provisions of this bill. I was wrong, because I've now found 67.
Oh, my gosh.
And I've been right, 66, because the Supreme Court said one of them's not unconstitutional. So I'm 43-1.
That's pretty good.
But there's still a number of things that are going to be found unconstitutional, not just in workers' comp law. And the second thing, I said term limits caused us to no longer have leadership to shut down the unconstitutional bills. But the second reason for unconstitutional bills is the party line. Is that everybody wants to vote for a bill that does away with abortions.
Right.
Now, that sounds good, but it's such a waste of time. And no matter where you stand on that issue, the federal law, Roe v. Wade is still the law.
Yeah.
So you can pass bills in Oklahoma to do away with abortions until you're blue in the face, but it won't do any good.
Yeah.
Because everybody knows they're going to be found unconstitutional. And it costs the state so much money to defend those. We often, even on some, many times, the state hires outside law firms to help contest some of these unconstitutional things or to support them. But certainly our Attorney General's office has grown tremendously over the years because they spend a lot of their time
defending unconstitutional
bills, but not only abortion, but for example, like the Ten Commandments issue.
Sure.
Okay, I mean, our Constitution was so clear on that, but they didn't care. And even after the Supreme Court ruled that way, they'll pass more bills to do that, you know. And every year, it seems like, they pass some kind of an abortion law, okay? And it always gets overturned, okay? And again, no matter where you stand on that, you need to look at it as a citizen by saying, this is really not a state issue.
Yeah.
And so, therefore, maybe we shouldn't be spending our time, because what we've done as the legislature, we've spent so much time talking day after day after day about those bills, is we never spend any time talking about $1 billion hole in the budget.
Right.
Okay? We don't spend any time on those important things. And I think that's not just my view.
No, it's
I
not.
think that's the view of most of the people of this state.
I think
Say,
so.
hey,
Yeah.
get up there and figure it out. I have written about an old governor of ours who was rough around the edges, to say the least. Alfalfa Bill Murray was chairman of our Constitutional Convention. He later was governor in the 1930s. And he was governor during the Great Depression. And once they had a budget hole not caused by inept leadership or overspending or just not taking care of business. It was caused by the Great Depression. And so there was a terrible crisis coming up. And so Bill Murray, toward the end of the legislative session, picked like 3 members from each house and just the leadership and said, okay, I've got enough food at the governor's mansion. I expect y'all to be over here at 8 o'clock Saturday morning. And I got enough food, and we're staying till we work it out. Well, 3 or 4 days, they had it worked out.
Wow.
But I mean, at night, the legislators bunked upstairs. They just were concerned about the future of Oklahoma, not talking about platitudes about abortion or the 10 Commandments or wah, 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 wah. They were concerned about our future, and they knew that we could not go forward unless they fixed it. And I think that here in 2017, that we are at that point. I think that in the field of education, for example, we are at a critical time. We are going to become a third world state, really. If we don't, not only in education, but in corrections, for example, and the treatment of mental health. There are so many areas in which we are last, and I don't want to be last.
We're second to last thanks to Mississippi.
No, that's right.
That used to be Arkansas's phrase,
absolutely.
thank God for Mississippi, but now it's ours.
No, it's ours. and in so many areas, unless leadership of this state steps up in the next few years, it could become irreversible. Or at least irreversible for a generation or two. See?
Absolutely.
If we don't spend money in education, and test scores prove that, we now are doing so much worse than we used to. But we have, we are a poor agrarian state. We will never have the economy like Texas.
Right.
Okay, we can't do that.
We don't have ports.
That's right. And so I don't expect us to be number one in anything but football. Okay? No, I don't expect us to be number one in spending on mental health or on in spending in education. But I sure want us to be 40th or 35th, see? I mean, I think we ought to have goals. I certainly think that we ought to be as good as all the states in this region. I mean, we ought to be at least to the regional average on things, and we're not at the regional average on anything.
No.
And so we have just dropped our ability, it seems, to focus on the real problems. Because it's so much easier to go circulate a petition, to do away with abortion, and to fight on the floor of the legislature day after day after day, on a bill that we know is going to be unconstitutional, but we don't care because it's the thing to do, okay? We need to get off that. The focus needs to be on what can we do as leaders of Oklahoma to move us further up the list. We don't want to be last in everything. We don't want to be last. And I can name 10 different areas of where we are just so severely lacking that our infrastructure as a state government is literally going to become a third world. I mean, we have more women, the more percentage of women in prison than not only any other state, but I can find no other country in the world that has a higher percentage of women in. And the way that we've made incredible progress in the last 30 years after a lawsuit named Terry D. that I'm writing a book about. Great progress in treatment of juvenile offenders.
Okay.
We're now moving back the other way. Because of lack of funding, we're moving back to where we were. We're moving back with problems in our prison system of where we were 25, 30 years ago. We made progress for a while, but we didn't show the leadership to account for the rainy day.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more with any with any of that. Yeah. All right. You've written a ton. You mentioned Alfalfa Bill. I recently you read you wrote the 2007 official centennial book that I read recently. You've written about civil rights leaders. What was that? Oh gosh,
Jimmy Stewart did Judge Vicki Miles LaGrange and I wrote the biography years ago of Jimmy Stewart, not the actor, but for many years the civil rights leader in Oklahoma, and that book was basically a history of the civil rights movement. So Roscoe Dunjee was an early great civil rights leader in Oklahoma. Claire Looper. But civil rights is passionate to my heart because as a lawyer, I want people to have rights, and it was so adverse to good faith. For example, when Ada Lois Scipio Fisher, a black girl from Chickasha, was first denied admission to the OU Law School, and when the United States Supreme Court said that nope, you gotta let her in, then the legislature establishes an equal law school in the basement of the state capitol with 2 professors. Well, that wasn't law school. So ultimately, the U.S. Supreme Court, in the year of my birth, in 1948, because of Roscoe Dunjee selecting Ada Lois Scipio Fisher as the claimant in that case, and Thurgood Marshall, the later Supreme Court justice, was her lawyer, and the Supreme Court of the United States says, Oklahoma, wake up. You can't do this. You've got to, we're in the middle of the 20th century. Yeah. You can't do this. But we lagged in so many areas like that because the legislature, going back to statehood.
Yeah.
Okay.
First Senate Bill 1. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Senate Bill 1 was actually the first bill passed by the legislature was a taxation bill. Okay, They had to do that. Yeah. And the history on it was that Teddy Roosevelt was Republican as president. Right. And Oklahomans really wanted to have 2 different states. The state of Sequoia, the Indian tribes wanted the eastern half of Oklahoma. They even had a Sequoia convention. They developed their own constitution, which 80% of it ended up in the Oklahoma Constitution. You had even our first governor, Charles Haskell, was from Muskogee, and he was involved in the Sequoian Convention. The Indian tribes wanted their own state, the state of Sequoia. And then Oklahoma Territory in the western part, from I-35 south, they didn't have I-35 then, but, but the western part of the state was going to be Oklahoma. Yeah. But Teddy Roosevelt, a Republican, said, look, I will put up with adding 2 Democratic senators against me, but not 4. So you guys, 2 things that he required. Number 1, you have got to be 1 state, not 2. Okay. Be the state of Oklahoma. And secondly, you must give blacks the right to vote. Okay? So Alfalfa Bill Murray, as chairman of the Constitutional Convention, gets up in his opening to the convention, says, well, President Roosevelt requires us to give, to treat everybody equal and to give blacks the right to vote, But everybody knows they'll never end up being anything but porters and blacksmiths. That's what Alfalfa Bill said. He wrote a book later, even in the 40s, The Negro's Place in the Call of Race.
Oh, my God.
That was terribly racist.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he wrote that in the 1940s.
Oh, my gosh.
Years after he was governor. But then, so the Constitution gives blacks the right to vote. But then we become a state. The first bill is a taxation bill. But then and it was a House bill because we've run into that recently. Okay. Taxation must begin in the House.
Got
okay,
it.
The legislature recently has not been abiding by that constitutional rule, the cigarette tax. Okay, but secondly, the second bill was by the way, we're giving people the right to vote, but we're going to come up with a way they're going to have to memorize the Constitution, or we're going to provide for separate transportation. I mean, we do that immediately as a state. We say, nope, blacks can't ride in the same railroad cars with whites.
Yeah.
And so we had that terrible history. Now, we were not alone in that.
Sure.
Throughout the South, that was the case.
Yeah.
I mean, in every state. But, for example, Mississippi and Georgia, are given a terrible rap for being such a hotbed for the Ku Klux Klan.
Sure.
But in the 1920s, and I'll write a book on that someday, in the 1920s, there was no firmer foothold for the Ku Klux Klan than in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
They controlled the legislature. They threw out one governor after 9 months, basically because of his opposition to the Klan. Jack Walton, 1923, was impeached and kicked out of office in 9 months.
Wasn't racist enough, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Huh.
And the Ku Klux Klan ruled Oklahoma City and Tulsa. I mean, they just really did.
So, I mean, if you've written about that, there's plenty of ugly stuff to write about, and we've got a history and a pattern of behavior that's not necessarily in alignment with your beliefs. So whether it's writing about Ralph Ellison or whether it's writing about Alfalfa Bill, like, one, why do you write about Oklahoma? Obviously you grew up here, you live here, all that sort of stuff, so you have an attraction to it, but like where does that come from?
I didn't write a book till I was 39.
Is that right?
Absolutely.
But you've got 3 million now.
Yeah, 129, but I've really done that in the last 30 years.
Wow.
But I never thought about writing a book. Now, I was a journalism graduate from the journalism school at OU.
And as a lawyer, you write.
Oh, absolutely. I had been editor of my high school newspaper. In my service in the Air National Guard, I was editor of the base newspaper.
Oh, okay.
And so I'd always done that. Never thought about writing a book until David Boren goes to the Senate.
Okay.
I stay behind to finish law school. I had run his campaign for the Senate in 1978. I stay behind and really try to look out for his parents, the former Congressman Lyle and his dear mother Christine. They lived in northwest Oklahoma City. So I often would go by on Fridays and make sure that lint's out of the dryer and and maybe run and get a pizza or something. And so during this time, I got to playing once a week dominoes with Lyle Boren. Remember, he had been the youngest man to ever be elected to the Congress back in 1936. Was great friends with Harry Truman. Harry and Bess Truman lived in the same rooming house with them. He was friends with Lyndon Johnson before Lyndon Johnson was in Congress, when he was just the clerk to a congressman from Texas. And so they lived in the same. And Sam Rayburn, who took him under his wing, he was friends with President Roosevelt, really good friends with him.
Carl Albert, probably.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. And so because of that, I heard all these stories playing dominoes, which I don't think I ever won a game playing dominoes with Lyle. Maybe it was because maybe because of his skill, maybe it was because I was so entranced by his stories. So I thought, somebody ought to write a book about this. So I teamed up with a law school professor of mine, Von Creel, who's still a dear friend. We've written a number of books together. He's a retired professor now. But with Vaughn, I wrote that book, and it literally, I don't know, I say it became an obsession. I've never done books for profit. Mm-hmm. I've never wanted to do that. All books, anytime I do a book, the recipient of all the funds is either like when I wrote Gary England's biography. His wife had beat breast cancer, so part of the proceeds went to the breast cancer research. When I wrote the Bill Tegan's book years ago, who was killed in the OSU plane crash, that money went to OSU. Many times it goes to the Oklahoma Hall of Fame to promote programs, but many other times, when History of the Governor's Mansion, so much of that money went to the Friends of the Governor's Mansion to just promote or to pay for projects,
restore it,
absolutely, and renovations and just repairs.
Be able to park Winnebagos in the back.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, that's right. To make it larger back there. Yeah, but the Lyle Bourne book started me on that.
Yeah,
and then from that. People that I interviewed in the Lyle Bourne book, I thought, well, they deserve a biography. And so it just kept, I bugged George Nye for 10 years to let me to write his biography. And so many people, and I thought, well, I want to write, and I've always had this theme, every fifth book, I want to write about somebody who is part of Oklahoma history that nobody knows about.
Oh, okay.
And it's been so neat. For example, in writing the Cape Bernard book, it resulted in a Cape Bernard statue, or not statue, but a sculpture that's outside the Secretary of State's office of where Miss Kate is sitting on a bench. I will admit that sometimes I sit down there and talk to Miss Kate, okay? Yeah. Because she was a little 5'3", 90-pound dynamo who was the only woman to address the Constitutional Convention and got more votes in the first election than the governor, more than anybody, and she couldn't vote for herself. We were still a dozen years away from women's suffrage.
Wow.
And was the first woman elected to a non-educational state office in the nation. But Miss Kate, but nobody, she had been forgotten. She didn't have any kids, never married, so she didn't even have a tombstone in the Fairlawn Cemetery here in Oklahoma City for 50 years.
Wow.
Until a women's group got together and bought her a tombstone.
That's amazing.
One of those every fifth one was Alice Robertson, who was the first woman postmaster in America, was friends with Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah.
And was the only woman congressman we ever had.
Really?
In fact, she was only the second woman ever elected to the U.S. Congress.
Wow.
And she was 65 years old and ran a cafeteria in downtown Muskogee. What does a woman at 65 in 1920 decide to do? Oh, I'm going to run for Congress. She's running, but she knew a lot of people coming through that cafeteria.
That's amazing.
And she was elected in 1920. I've always had the theme that even though a lot of significant things have happened in Oklahoma, like the land run, our state was open for land runs like no other place in the world, unique in world history.
Yeah,
the removal of the tribes on the Trail of Tears,
very
unique in world history.
Yeah.
But I've always thought our history is not about those very significant events or even places. Our history, it is about our people. It's not about the land run. It's about that guy sitting on a horse on April 22nd of 1889 and, his wife's back somewhere and his future is on the line at that moment. Yeah. As the rifle sounds, on the left is a guy on a bicycle from St. Louis, and the right is a wagon of a family with all their worldly goods in it, looking for a new place, new home and a new place. And then the rifle sounds, and it's about those people, not the land run itself. But then they rush off and they stake out a new piece of land on a creek. This is going to be their land for the future. Mm-hmm. Then they rush and then they record that deed down at the land office. It's about our people. Our incredible history is about our people. There are bad chapters of that. See, we, like the other southern states, were very racist. Mm-hmm. Republican Henry Bellman, I know, pushed legislation in 1965 to wipe off the books for example, that you got to have separate bathrooms in the state capitol. Mm-hmm. That didn't get changed until 1965.
That's crazy.
In the legislation, we weren't practicing it then, but he wiped it off he convinced the legislature to wipe it off the books. But our incredible story is not about places and events, although they're unique.
Yeah,
it's about our people.
I agree with that. Like, it seems weird to me, and I don't know how accurate it is or if I'm just biased, but it seems like we have an insane amount of talent acting, the arts in general, athletics. I don't know how you would classify pageantry. So, like, all our Miss America contestants, the number of actors and musicians and athletes that we produce is just and business.
No question. The idea that Oklahoma is a backward state has never been there. I'm afraid if we keep going like we are now, we won't educate the people with those ideas. Yeah. But for example, our ideas of Oklahomans, that's why it's about our people, have literally changed the world. From where we're sitting here in Oklahoma City, 3 blocks away is where Syl Goldman invented the shopping cart because he was tired of carrying women's groceries out to the car all day, Within 4 or 5 blocks from here, the parking meter was introduced to the world. Mm-hmm. The twisty tie was invented in Oklahoma. A young man who was born in Norman in 1906, Carl Jansky, that nobody knows anything about, he was the first person to receive radio waves from the Milky Way. Oh. He is so revered. You've arrived if in your profession they name something after you.
Yeah.
The unit of measurement in radio astronomy is the Jansky.
Oh, wow.
It's a kid born in Norman in 1906. Carl, his dad was a chemistry professor there. Within 8 miles of each other, 2 leading retailers in the world, in world history, came. We know about Sam Walton
sure.
being born in Kingfisher, but just 8 miles away, just over in the next county, is born a guy named Joe Albertson. He goes off to Idaho later in life and gets with Leonard Skaggs Albertson.
Yeah.
2 Albertson and Walton, 2 of the world's greatest retailers, born within 8 miles of each other during the Great Depression.
Yeah,
okay?
That's wild.
In Oklahoma. In sports, Jim Thorpe's the greatest athlete of all time.
Yeah.
1 out of every 10 men who ever played Major League Baseball in America came through Oklahoma. 1 out of 10.
Wow.
Either born here, died here, played college ball here, minor league ball here. So many people. The great Rogers Hornsby played shortstop for the Hugo team when he was in the minor leagues.
Really?
Because we had the Sooner State League that so many future Hall of Famers came through. Whitey Herzog is a famous name in sports. Well, where would you think Whitey Herzog would get his nickname? When I wrote the book about baseball, I interviewed Whitey.
Okay.
And it's one of the great nicknames in baseball. Whitey got his nickname in Ardmore, Oklahoma. He played for the Yankees Class D club, the McAllister, I've forgotten their name, but McAllister. They were playing in Ardmore one night, and he asked, his name was Dorrell, D-O-R-R-E-L-L.
Dorrell Herzog.
Yeah. But every time they'd go to a town, they would print it as Darrell. They thought it was a mistake.
Yeah.
He was tired of that. So he told the announcer for the McAllister Rockets on this night in Ardmore in the 1950s, you need to give me a nickname. I'm tired of this. And he was kind of tow-headed, so he said, what about Whitey? That literally, Whitey Herzog told me that story.
Wow.
So many things happened in Oklahoma like that. I hope that 50 years from now, when a writer is writing about things in Oklahoma, that in our second century, we changed the world as much as we did in the first century. I mean, if you talk about commerce, Earl Halliburton pawned his wife's wedding ring to patent this new oil cementing idea. He founded a little company in 1920 in Wilson, the Halliburton Company.
They've done okay since then.
Hey, in now a century and what? I mean, a century later, they're still one of the world's largest companies.
Absolutely.
And in oil and gas, I mean, my goodness, we led the petroleum world.
Yeah.
J. Paul Getty, in fact, he left all of his money to the Los Angeles, or the Getty Museum of Art in Los Angeles. I read recently of where that museum has the highest endowment of any museum in America.
Oh, really?
So in our second century, will we change the world like we did in the first century? Will we have as much influence? Because no state has influenced music like we have. Now I think it's because we were a melting pot. A lot of blacks came to Oklahoma thinking we were going to be an all-black state.
Right. Sure.
And so we have the Trail of Tears with the Indians. Yeah. And then we have all of these Europeans are coming in to farm the lands of western Oklahoma. So we have this amalgamation of people. And I think that, combining their cultures and their music, caused us to have a Bob Wills that, has a new kind of music, Western swing. Yeah. Causes Charlie Christian down in Deep Deuce in Oklahoma City to literally create the jazz guitar as a solo instrument. We have the electric guitar invented in Beggs, Oklahoma. I mean, we have so many things that affected the world. I mean, even in Little Rascals, Darla is from Leedy, Oklahoma, okay? And here's a neat fact, and I did the math on it recently, watching the Miss America pageant. Because Jane Giroux is a dear friend of mine and was our Miss America in 1967. But I did the math on it that if you take I-35, there have been more Miss Americas from just western Oklahoma than of 45 of the states.
Wow.
I think just western Oklahoma. I have a new book coming out on western Oklahoma sometime after the first of the year. But about all the things that have happened in western Oklahoma.
It's amazing.
But really, more Miss Americas from western Oklahoma than in all those states, and then almost all the states.
That's amazing. This has been great. I got goosebumps a couple of times. But I want to be respectful of your time. And so these are my final 5 questions. This will be
okay.
It's not necessarily a rapid fire, but close. What's your morning routine like?
I'd like to get up first thing. I awake ready to go.
Yeah.
And
what time do you get up?
I get up about 5:30.
Okay.
I've successfully battled multiple myeloma in the last 8 or 9 months.
Wow. Congratulations.
All of my markers, I had to go through chemotherapy, but fortunately had no side effects except the bottom of my feet burned, and that's taken care of by medication.
Wow.
And peppermint oil. I picked that up from somebody along the way. But so I really am sleeping an hour. I used to, for most of my life, I slept 5 hours. Ugh. Now I'm sleeping 6.
Okay.
But 5 hours, but I think that's because of I'm sure that the months and months and months of chemotherapy, even though I didn't miss an hour of work, made my body want to sleep a little more. So I think it did. So I get up and I immediately come to the office.
Okay.
And I've always tried to write a chapter of a book every morning.
Wow.
That's the only way I can put out 5 or 6 books a year.
Yeah.
Either that or organize, because I have boxes. I'm doing a biography of former Senator Don Nichols right now, and so I have boxes of materials, interviews, and Ryan Leonard is my co-author, and he's done many interviews, and it's really neat. If you need Bob Dole's email, 2 or 3 weeks ago, he emailed me his foreword, because he's writing the foreword to the book, has written the foreword to the book. And I've finished a biography of a former director of the CIA, James Woolsey, who you see on CNN and Fox all the time.
Yeah.
Recently, he's perhaps one of the world's foremost experts in ICBMs.
Really?
Because in the Reagan administration, Jim, who's a Tulsa native, and he was Clinton's CIA director, but in the Reagan administration, he did all of the negotiation on the SALT treaties.
Really?
In Vienna, lived in Vienna for years, and did also. He knows about ICBMs. In fact, he either writes I have an entire 3-ring binder of about 200 op-eds that he has written either in the Washington Post or the New York Times in the last 25 years.
Wow.
He just is a very guy from Tulsa.
Yeah.
Still lives his Tulsa roots, comes back every summer for the Tulsa Central High School reunion. He just doesn't miss. I mean, he loves his Tulsa roots.
Wow.
Ralph Ellison was like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I know this is a rapid-fire deal, but I get up early in the morning, try to write a chapter of a book.
That's amazing. We haven't talked much about music, but who's your biggest musical influence?
Whoa. I would probably say Woody Guthrie.
Oh, really?
Because I was inducted into the Oklahoma Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
In fact, Woody Guthrie, right after Woody Guthrie. Now, Woody's been gone a long time, and his sister was there, but literally on the night that Woody was inducted, I was inducted. And I've always thought that here's another guy who internationally, Bob Dylan, I read an interview of him recently, and he says Woody Guthrie's music was part of his foundation. And Woody's been dead for 40 years.
Yeah.
But here, Bob Dylan, an icon of music. But Woody Guthrie, now, Bob Wills is a pretty close. I don't even necessarily like that kind of music. As a former disc jockey, I'm a 60s guy.
Okay.
With the Supremes and a lot of people from Oklahoma, like old pop hits, Conway Twitty's,
Yeah.
It's Only Make Believe from the 50s, and
That's old school Twitty.
Oh yeah,
That's old.
before.
That's real
Oh yeah,
old.
no. That's when he lived in South Oklahoma City and had Twitty Burgers restaurant.
I don't know about this.
And built houses in South Oklahoma City. And when I was a disc jockey, and he would come by the station or call and say, "Hey, play It's Only Make Believe," because he had a big pop hit.
That's funny.
In the 50s with that. But Woody Guthrie, because he was so politically incorrect. But in looking back, he was right all the time.
Yeah.
He was an early folk singer, and we didn't respect him in Oklahoma for a long time.
Have you been to the new museum out in Tulsa?
I have,
Yeah.
have.
Is it cool?
Oh, yes.
Haven't been yet.
No. It's everything that pays tribute to Woody Guthrie, I'm for.
Okay, cool. Okay, now this will be a tough one. What's your favorite book to read, excluding the 8 million you've written?
Okay. Through David Boren, I've got to know David McCullough.
Oh, the biographer.
Okay? Yes.
Yeah.
And I guess my favorite book is his biography of John Adams.
Oh, okay.
I really, David is such an incredible, detailed writer.
Yeah.
And you had John Adams, the second president, and the day that he was inaugurated was one of the great days in world history. You say, why? Because it was the first time that anybody remembered for centuries and centuries that there had been a transfer of power without blood.
Oh, wow.
I mean, sure, you had kings and queens, but nobody else changed leadership without a revolution.
Right.
Okay? But here, George Washington peacefully leaves office, and John Adams becomes president. Wow. Nobody thought about it at the time. Here was a peaceful, democracy can work. It was a peaceful transfer of power. No bloodlet anywhere for that transfer. So David McCullough's John Adams got to be there.
What's your favorite spot to go or where's your favorite spot to go in Oklahoma?
Broken Bow is my hometown, and McCurtain County is very dear to my heart. And I guess my favorite place to go would be in the upper reaches of the Mountain Fork River.
Okay.
And of where that I love to think, okay, what was this like 200 years ago? Another very special spot, and this is crazy, is when I go to Sam Walton's store from my home in far south Oklahoma City and cross the South Canadian
You
River.
go to Newcastle?
I do.
Oh,
yeah,
really?
Yeah. Because I live far south. And
They got that new one up there.
No,
though.
I know it. I still go to the Newcastle one, okay? I'm sure I'll change, because that's only 2 miles from my house. But when I cross that river, I think of a guy named Bernard de la Harpe, who 298 years ago came up that river. And I'm thinking, when it's real low, and I'm thinking, boy, how did he do that? Well, they carried their boats a lot. But he was the first Frenchman. And he wrote the first descriptions of Oklahoma.
Really?
He came into, but in fact, I'll write a book in 2019 called The First 300 Years of Oklahoma. Because the first person to write anything about was Bernard de la Harpe in August of 1719, when he crossed into what is now McCurtain County, my home, and came up and saw bears, and he's writing this incredible journal. In fact, his journal was published by the OU Press a long time ago. But I want to commemorate that in 2019 as the 300-year anniversary of written Oklahoma history. But I think about that every time I cross that bridge.
Really?
I look down at the river and I think of Bernard de la Harpe.
That's amazing.
And think about, wow, the river's up today. Boy, if it was like this 300 years ago, he would have had smooth sailing. Because he came all the way to Tulsa, but he was on the South Canadian a lot. He went up the Arkansas River to Tulsa and interacted with the creeks,
Wow.
But he wrote about all this, and the only source of Oklahoma history in the 1700s is from several people who came through. Daniel Boone's son, Nathan, came through surveying for a military road and wrote some really neat things,
Wow. What's your evening routine like?
Well, I have a wonderful wife, and
shout out to Shemaine.
That's right. A year ago, our youngest, Cody, went off to Wake Forest. He's the brightest kid at Wake Forest.
That doesn't make any sense to me.
We had a real surprise. we had a real surprise 20 years ago, and had a baby.
Yeah.
And so, but he's a sophomore at Wake Forest, an anthropology major.
What?
Wants to either be a college professor or he wants to run the Smithsonian. So we're empty nesters. And so our evening routine is, even though I come to work early, about 5:30, I might text her, do you want to meet at this restaurant, because we eat out most of the time.
Sure.
Okay? We love doing that. Yeah. And we can do that as empty nesters.
Yeah.
And then, for the last 6 months, we have been on a binge of watching Law and Order SVU.
Really? Where do you watch SVU? Is it?
Well, she has taped. It's on,
it's syndicated, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So it's syndicated, and so on DVR, she has taped 250 versions. So almost every night. Now, we're both big sports fans, and so we watched, last night we watched Monday Night Football, okay? But at halftime, we decided not to, and we watched before we went to bed, we watched an episode of that. We know, and we'll say, wait a minute, didn't he get killed later on? Because we've not watched them in order.
Yeah.
We should have, And then, but we've since Cody's gone off to school, we've binged watched things. We watched all seasons of 24. There's some other things that
have
we've
you
done
watched House of Cards yet?
No, but that's on. Hey, we're going to do that.
Yeah.
And then, for example, we're just like routine. About 9:30, we might go to bed, and then I've been reading as a Bible study a lady who's been dead for a very long time named Henrietta Mears, who Billy Graham said was perhaps the greatest Christian he had ever known.
Oh, wow.
Henrietta Mears was a professor, and she wrote this very thick book called What the Bible is All About. It's not just, it's an incredible tool to assist in Bible reading because she talks about what's happening at the time historically.
Okay.
We're in the book of Esther, so for example, last night And what I do is I read this out loud to Shemaine. Okay, I literally, we go to bed, and then I read for 20 minutes or so. I read from this Henrietta Mears book. Now, it's such a thick book, it's going to take us a year to finish it.
Sure.
And then I will turn the TV on, watch a little news.
Yeah.
I love Murder, She Wrote, so I might watch because I don't go to sleep till real late.
Yeah.
So long after she is asleep, I'm still watching Murder, She Wrote, because it comes on both at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock, So if I'm up till midnight, no problem,
That's
Then I sleep a few hours and I'm ready to go again.
That's amazing. That's a blistering pace that wears me out just in the description.
Oh, it's wonderful. Hey, life is a series of 15-minute segments. And
that sounds like a Dale Carnegie quote.
Yeah. But maybe I should write this book sometime. But if I've got just 15 minutes sometime, I've always got a 15-minute project.
Yeah. I
got a call I can make. I mean, one of my kids said, I need 2 hours to really do anything. No. Life is a series of 15-minute segments.
Wow.
And
pro tip, write that down, everybody.
Hey, that's right. But I enjoy life very much. Have 9 wonderful grandchildren with the 10th on the way.
Oh.
Natalie, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, she is. She's
that's great.
10 weeks now.
Wow, congrats,
She's 10
Natalie.
weeks along and showing. Sorry, Natalie.
Do you want me to edit that out? I can edit it.
No, I don't care. I don't care. She's announced it now, so we're fine.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, Bob, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This was an extreme pleasure for me. Thanks so much.
I've enjoyed it very much. I love talking about Oklahoma.
Oh, great. Good.
Are we watching a movie?
No, I'm going to watch Ken Burns.
It's not really good.
You don't think Ken Burns is good?
I don't want to watch Ken Burns. You can't watch Ken Burns.
Thank you so much to Bob. I appreciate it. I appreciate your time. Thanks to your family. Thanks, Natalie, for facilitating, if you helped facilitate. And thanks to Shemaine for just being a Shemaine. Shout out to Shemaine. And that's probably it for a while. Check out Bob Burke's work at your local bookstore. If they don't have any, ask them to get some. If they won't, go to Amazon. You don't need that sort of negativity in your life. Also, the Metro Library System has quite a few titles available as well. I highly recommend the Ralph Ellison biography and the David Warren biography. So I appreciate y'all listening. Subscribe and keep listening, or check out RileyEvanRoss.com, or you can email I say us. You can email me at y'allokpodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, don't be a stranger.